England isn't directly known for or associated with gun crime. That's because England has somewhere between 0.3 to 0.5 guns per person. To put that in comparison with the USA, they have around 1.2 guns per person. The legal civilian firearm landscape is tightly regulated by the Home Office, with records split between firearm certificates for rifles and Section 1 shotguns and shotgun ownership certificates for standard shotguns. Ownership tends to be tied to agricultural work, sporting, and deer management, which leads to a very localized distribution of weapons. For instance, largely rural regions like North Yorkshire boast the highest rate of legal gun ownership, while highly urbanized areas have significantly lower densities. Today, we're going to be taking a look at 3 of the deadliest mass shootings in England since the end of World War II. Each of these incidents has their own story to tell. A young man who idolized incel culture, systematic failures for checks against violent people, a shooter that moved so fast, information and police couldn't keep up, and victims who simply found themselves in the wrong place at the worst time, who lost their lives for seemingly no reason whatsoever. I'm going to be taking a leaf out of that chapter's book, and we're going to be doing this iceberg style, and each one is going to get gradually worse. Our story begins with the 12 minutes that changed Plymouth forever. August 12th, 2021. The town of Cumbria, Plymouth. At 6:11 and 6:12 p.m, Devon and Cornwall police were alerted to an incident that had occurred. Reports of gunshots and a young man walking the streets wielding a weapon. People had been injured, people had been killed. Minutes before emergency services received the call, at approximately 6:05 p.m, 22-year-old Jake Davison was arguing with his mother in their home on Biddick Drive. The argument turned physical, with later reports stating that Jake had grabbed his mother, Maxine, by the throat and forcibly stopped her from leaving her bedroom. Minutes later, Davison opened fire twice in quick succession, killing his own mother with a legally owned pump-action shotgun. He spilled out into the streets, and by tragic happenstance, a 43-year-old father was nearby with his 3-year-old daughter. Sophie and Lee Martin were out walking their bulldog when their paths crossed with Davison, and both were shot at close range. When the police arrived, Lee was found cradling his daughter. Davison carried on and put rounds into a neighbouring property, injuring 2 people. His route took him to Linear Park, where he encountered Stephen Washington as he was walking his dogs. "See you in a bit. Won't be long." Those were the last words he said to his wife of almost 40 years, before the sound of a large bang rang out throughout the area. Davison continued towards Henderson Place and fatally wounded Kate Shepherd outside of a hair salon at approximately 6:15. He remarked to a passing resident that there was nothing to worry about, mate, as he was described to have been walking like he was on patrol, like a soldier with a gun. By this time, armed police were closing in on him as he moved down Bedford Street, where he entered a parking garage and started verbally threatening members of the public. He left without firing a shot and went back towards Henderson Place. At 6:23 p.m, as further police arrived and the net began to tighten, Davison turned the gun on himself. A senseless rampage of hatred spilling over from a domestic dispute. Not only is this incident absolutely devastating, but in such a short space of time, years of anguish came to a head. 12 minutes from the first shot taken to Davison taking his own life. As the town cried out for answers, information began to appear about Jake Davison that sparked outrage. As a child, Davison was diagnosed with autism and ADHD and attended a school for children who require additional support. In year 9, which for my non-UK friends is about 13, 14 years old, he had a review with a mental health guidance counselling organisation who stated that Davison loves guns and he wanted to join a gun club. A large part of that review was talking about how he could get involved with guns, and they suggested sensible options like joining the Army Cadets. The organisation said that Davison's mother had called them in November of 2016, expressing her concerns that her son was becoming isolated and obsessed with weapons. That same year, Davison was reported to the police for allegedly attacking a man and his pregnant girlfriend at a skate park. He was warned, but not prosecuted. A source close to the family said that Davison's mental health had recently deteriorated after battling against it for his entire life. His mother had been begging for help from the local authorities, but nobody did a welfare check. Davison applied for his shotgun license in July of 2017, in which he declared his autism on the form and gave officers permission to contact his local doctor. His application was accepted the same year, and police believed he used a legally held firearm in the shooting. In 2020, following a further assault allegation, his license was removed, but returned back to him in 2021, a month before the killings. Now, you're probably wondering why the police would return the firearms. There's something called the Pathfinder Scheme, which is a scheme designed to deal with offenders outside of the criminal justice process. Once Davison had gone through this scheme, Devon and Cornwall police deemed him fit to have his license returned to him. Davison uploaded videos on YouTube under the name Professor Waffle. His videos would include references to inceldom, the black pill worldview, and nihilism. In his final video, he described himself as beaten down and defeated by life and said, "I wouldn't classify myself as an incel, but have talked to people similar to me who have had nothing but themselves."
I know a lot of people say, oh, that's weak-minded, that's pathetic, but dude, it's like how many years I've been working out.
He was a frequent Reddit user and shared his hostility and resentment towards his mother, who had repeatedly attempted to obtain and persuade him to receive mental health treatment. The day before the shooting took place, Reddit banned his account after deeming his communications with a 16-year-old girl from America was inappropriate. According to reports, he was asking the girl if she would come and visit him, go on dates, and sleep with him. When she pushed back, he was supposedly very forceful in the fact that 16 years old is the age of consent in England, so it would be fine. Various users urged her to report Davison to the police, but she wrote that she didn't know what to do and had been advised by her mother not to get involved. All of this information laid out just pulls me back to the biggest question there is. Why did they give him a shotgun license? A young boy who has a history of violence and mental health issues being equipped with a deadly weapon is hardly ideal. Once you couple that with the constant outcries from his mother and his online behaviors, the red flags start popping up all over the place. The inquest that took place afterwards was swift and savage. It concluded that all 5 victims were unlawfully killed and that serious failures by Devon and Cornwall police had allowed Davison to possess the shotgun. Those failures included an insufficient investigation of his medical and violent history, inadequate firearms licensing training, failure to escalate high-risk decisions to senior management, incorrect use of the risk assessment system, the decision to return the shotgun following the skate park assaults, and a wider lack of supervision and scrutiny within the licensing unit itself. The jury described the management of the firearms and explosive licensing unit as a catastrophic failure. The case resulted in recommendations concerning firearms officer training, medical information, continuing assessment of certificate holders, and stronger scrutiny of licensing decisions. The British government also announced that it would issue guidance to require police to investigate social media posts of firearm license applicants and the current holders. All of this, in the modern world we live in, sounds sensible and appropriate for the times. Tragically, it took the unanswered outcries of a concerned mother and a violent rampage that cast the country into darkness to motivate modernization. The next case sits in a slightly different space. The Firearms Licensing Review concluded that there had been no reasonable licensing opportunity to identify the shooter as an immediate danger. His license had been properly issued, and neither the police nor medical services possessed information that justified removing his weapons. On the 2nd of June 2010, across communities across West Cumbria, Derrick Bird took the lives of 12 people and injured 11. Bird was a 52-year-old taxi driver who held a shotgun certificate for decades, alongside a firearm certificate for his rifle. In the weeks before the shooting, Bird had become preoccupied with a HMRC inquiry into his declared income. Now, for my non-UK residents, again, HMRC, we're talking taxes. This is an inquiry into his self-employed income. It's something that's relatively standard and you can be picked at random for it. His accountant had assured him that everything was above board and that they just needed to wade through the mountain of questions and paperwork. Bird, on the other hand, was terrified that he would go to jail over the smallest of details and had developed an irrational belief that his twin brother David and solicitor Kevin were conspiring against him. He also held grievances against fellow taxi drivers in Whitehaven over things like fare poaching, practical jokes, and personal ridicule. Now, all of these things appear to explain the motivation for the attack's initial phase. But then things took a dark turn. Sometime after midnight, Bird went to his twin brother David's home and killed him. The body wasn't discovered until later that morning, meaning that the first murder remained unknown whilst the wider attack was unfolding. At 5:14 a.m, Bird arrived near his solicitor Kevin's home at Mowbray Farm and waited in his taxi for almost 5 hours. Around 10 a.m, he used his taxi to block Kevin's vehicle, wounded him, and pursued him towards the farm where he ultimately took his life. Bird then drove to the Duke Street taxi rank in Whitehaven, a place where he frequently worked. At around 10:27, he killed taxi driver Darren Rawcastle and wounded Donald Reed. He also shot other taxi drivers as he moved out of the town. Now, at first, the people attacked were known to Bird, and as I mentioned before, they appear to be selected. This is where things get dark, and as a best guess, hysteria took control. Bird travelled through Egremont, Seascale, and the surrounding villages. He repeatedly stopped alongside pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists before shooting at them. The police were receiving scattered reports from all across the area, with some of them saying that there had been accidents or possible air rifle shootings. The concept of a gunman being on the loose in West Cumbria wasn't people's initial thought. Between the time of the first police phone call at 10:13 a.m. and Bird abandoning his vehicle at approximately 12:15 p.m, he had travelled around 52 miles. Within that time window, Gary Pudham, Jane Robinson, Michael Pike, Kenneth Fishburne, James and Jennifer Jackson, Susan Hughes, Isaac Dixon, and Jamie Clark lost their lives in what can only be described as a senseless act of violence. More than 40 police officers were deployed throughout the ordeal, but they only saw him twice and had no practical opportunity to stop him on either occasion. After damaging his vehicle, Bird removed his rifle and entered Oak Howe Woods. His body was found at approximately 1:40 p.m. He had taken his own life. I mentioned previously that unlike Plymouth, the firearms licensing review concluded that there had been no indication that Bird was an immediate danger. His licenses had been properly issued, and neither police nor medical services had any information that could clearly justify removing his weapons. The police response did identify areas for improvement: firearms command, resource tracking, interagency comms, and armed coverage across Cumbria's difficult geography. However, it concluded that the speed, distances, and unpredictability of Bird's route made interception extremely difficult. After all, he'd been a taxi driver for many years, and he knew the area better than anyone. If there was any slight indication that he was going to be intercepted, Bird could very quickly have diverted to a different route without needing a map or the time to think about it. The haunting question that sits on the minds of the West Cumbria community is simple. Why? It's easy to theorize the earlier victims based off of his rising paranoia. They feel planned, personal. Everything else, again, just appears to be tragic happenstance. That's a phrase I've used twice now. Tragic happenstance. The third and final case is statistically the worst. It also sits firmly as the most confusing one out of all of them. The only way I can describe everything I'm about to tell you is tragic happenstance. Hungerford, 1987. A small town with a population of around 5,000 people without a recorded murder for more than a century. Michael Ryan was 27, lived with his mother, and had no criminal history or any police history that had formally disqualified him from owning firearms. He'd held a shotgun certificate since 1978, and in December of 1986, he was granted a firearm certificate for target shooting. Later on, he would receive extended permission to acquire additional handguns and rifles. On the 6th of August 1987, he purchased a 7.62mm semi-automatic rifle, and on the 8th of August he purchased a .30 caliber carbine. Police were notified about these purchases only days before the incident took place, regardless of the weapons being legally obtained. On the 19th of August, less than 2 weeks after acquiring an extended arsenal, Michael abducted and killed Susan Godfrey, who had been picnicking with her 2 young children in Savernake Forest. He left the forest and drove east, stopping to fill up his car at a petrol station, as well as filling up a petrol canister. After another customer had left the petrol station, Michael fired his M1 carbine at the cash register from the forecourt. He then entered the building with the intention of shooting her at point-blank range, but either his gun had jammed or the magazine had somehow released itself from the weapon. He left the petrol station and began driving back towards his house. At this point, the cashier and the customer that had previously left phoned the police to report the incident. Thames Valley Police sent 2 patrol cars to the petrol station, seemingly investigating what they believed was an armed robbery. They were completely unaware of the murder at Savernake Forest, which was being responded to by officers from Wiltshire Police. This meant that there were 2 separate manhunts underway. Michael returned to the home that he shared with his mother. Neighbours reported seeing him arriving, looking seemingly upset, and then hearing gunshots from inside the property. He had shot the family dogs, and after finding out that his car wasn't starting, Michael took the petrol canister he filled up and used it to set the home ablaze. What preceded this was absolutely horrendous. Over the course of the next hour, Michael went on to kill 15 people, and 15 more were seriously injured. Roland Mason, Sheila Mason, Kenneth Clements, PC Roger Brereton, Abdul Khan, George White, Dorothy Ryan, his mother, Francis Butler, Marcus Bernard, Douglas Wainwright, Eric Vardy, Sandra Hill, Victor Gibbs, Myrtle Gibbs, and Ian Plale. That brought the total lost souls on this day to 16. And as I say, many more injured. After wandering the streets senselessly, Michael began to make his way towards the school. During this time, police were struggling to pinpoint his exact locations. The emergency telephone lines were jammed with calls and quality information was struggling to get through. Contradicting statements about his current position and poor radio coverage made the job for armed response units incredibly difficult. There was also a lot of pressure from the sky, with police and press helicopters creating a ton of noise, further adding to the confusion. At around 1:45 p.m, Michael had made it to the John O'Gaunt School, but his location wasn't confirmed with police for a few hours. The gunshots had stopped, but police had no idea where he was. By 5:25 p.m, police had located Michael and begun negotiations with him. During those talks, he had expressed regret about killing his mother, but didn't provide any coherent explanation for the wider violence. A single gunshot rang out throughout the grounds of the school at 6:52 p.m. And later that evening, after a halt in communication, police entered the school to find Michael had turned the gun on himself. He left no manifesto, no logical explanation, no resolution. Just a trail of destruction that changed the town entirely. The people of Hungerford to this day find it painful to talk about and refer to it as the incident. Online publications overused the word massacre, but a gentleman local to the town spoke publicly and said everyone felt the word dehumanized the victims. Afterwards, a massive review of firearms legislation took place, and the Firearms Amendment Act of 1988 changed the laws around which weapons people could access and how they could be stored. Each of these stories all tell a different tale. In Plymouth, the authorities had warning signs everywhere, with people trying to intervene and highlight issues that were ultimately ignored. In Cumbria, the threat was moving faster than information could, and armed police struggled to follow. Hungerford, though, Hungerford feels different. The weapons were lawfully obtained. There was no indication that Michael Ryan was a threat. The truth died with him, leaving the families, friends, and residents of the area asking the same question as the people of Plymouth and Cumbria. Why? In all 3 of these incidents, it's impossible to fully understand why. Partly because none of the shooters left us with a great deal of information, and partly because no one had a chance to speak with them before the end. We can draw some conclusions, sure. We can theorize and we can discuss. The important thing above all when discussing these things is doing so with respect. Respect for the victims who found themselves entangled in the chaos. Respect for the emergency services that unknowingly found themselves in the midst of something they'd potentially not trained for. And respect for those left behind, rebuilding the lives and locations devastated by tragic happenstance. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is William and this is the Baker Street Bureau. Thank you for choosing to spend your precious time with me today. If you're new here, welcome, and if not, welcome back. If you've got nothing else on, I'd love to spend some more time with you in one of my other videos. But if I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.